when one person perceives things to be one way when in reality it is another, it causes stress in a relationship where the relationship now requires reconciliation, to be reconciled because somebody perceived it the wrong way. Have you ever said something to somebody and it was taken in a way that you didn't send it out? Because they were reading one number and you were reading another number, and you were trying to communicate one number, and sometimes it doesn't come out right, and people mistake what we're trying to communicate, and they get the wrong value to what is said and miss the whole message and wind up offended, and now there is distrust in the relationships and sometimes animosity. And that's why reconciliation is necessary to dissolve the distrust and to make us friends again. Another thing that I noticed when I would be doing the bank reconciliation is that sometimes our balance was lower than the bank's balance because we had made deposits that were not reflected on the bank statement. And when that happens, these are called deposits in transit. In transit. That means that this thing is in process. That means that sometimes when you are in relationship and you're telling the person, you look so beautiful today. What you looking at anyway? You made a deposit, but you don't see the value of it reflected in the account of the relationship. The deposit is in transit. Are you listening? And so there are some times you pay your tithes and you're expecting the next day to be blessed, but it is a deposit that is in transit. Are you listening? It's in transit. Listen, that's why he said, be not weary in well doing, for you shall reap in due season if you faint not. And you can get discouraged when you are trying to do the best that you know how to do and you're not seeing it, the results, and you don't feel appreciated for what you are contributing to the relationship at all. Anybody know what I'm talking about in this house tonight? I'm just telling you that when that happens, you've been doing good things, you've got deposits in transit. Oh, they have not taken account of it, but it's on its way. You got a seed that is in the ground. This thing is coming back up. It is in transit. It is moving. It is working toward that thing. You've been praying. You've been laboring. God has seen your tears. He has heard your prayers. I don't know who I'm talking to tonight, but I discern that there are some things that are in transit where you have made spiritual deposits and you've not seen that thing reflected on the statement that you have received in your life. And you're wondering, why is everybody else getting blessed, Lord, and I'm sitting here waiting on mine? But I'm here to declare to you, I know this from experience with bank reconciliation a long time ago, that there are deposits that are in transit. Can I tell you another thing that I noticed when I would be reconciling the account? I would notice that there would be a discrepancy in the balance another time, and so I had to look for all kinds of things, deposits that were in transit that we had on our books and they didn't have on theirs. And there were other times that we had written checks out and the other person had deposited in their bank, but it hadn't reached our bank back yet. And so they were checks in transit. And so sometimes there are disbursements. Some of y'all have been caught that way because you check the bank balance and you notice that it was sort of high, and then you go out and write another check thinking that you had the higher amount. You think the Lord done bless you, and then you get caught because of some stuff that's in transit. See, that thing works both ways, because you did something over here and you thought that because it was not immediately reflected that you had gotten by. Shh. You see, when there was a disbursement, there's a going out. Whenever you go out, whatever goes out takes your balance down. And so if it goes out but if the bank is not showing that your balance has gone down, it's only because it hadn't hit yet, but it will hit. Trust me, it will hit. Oh, it's going down. It's going down. It's going. Oh, they're gonna find it. Somebody's going to put it in there, but it's in transit. It's in progress. It's moving. It'll get there. It will reach its destination. Don't be, discouraged. I know things move more rapidly now. I mean, because they can, you notice how they can just take your check now and hand it right back to you. Because they got you on lockdown now. It's not too much transit now. Technology has sped some of that stuff up now. But I'm just telling you, as time winds up, I want you to know that stuff doesn't stay in transit as long. Years ago, it used to be where you could do some mess, and it took years for that stuff to catch up with you. But now you do it in the morning, and it's in your face in the evening. I'm just telling you, you used to be able to get away with it a long time. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And so it just goes on to tell us that what throws relationships out of balance, it creates a clog. And then whenever you give somebody your word, but then it turns out to be no good, that's a clog in a relationship. When a person's word is good, you can take that to the bank. Trust me, when a person's word is good, and I cannot tell you how many relationships have been destroyed. The conciliation has been destroyed because they have no trust, because they don't keep their word. They don't keep their word. And so it's interesting that in order to reconcile the account, we had to make all of those differences consistent on both sets of books. And sometimes on those interest-bearing accounts, the bank would give us interest, and then we would have to, the interest would not be reflected on our books. And there were times that because of what we had in the bank, it had gained interest of people in high places. And it was making money, and we didn't even know it, or we didn't know how much it was. So when we got the statement, we saw how much interest had been accrued to the account, and in order to reconcile the account, we would have to enter that interest earned on our books that we didn't already have. And so there are things that you will have done that have earned you the interest of God. And you're not even aware, but I'm telling you, there's a divine reconciliation that actually takes place. And I'm so glad that we got a God who loves us and who is reconciling the world back to us. But you cannot reconcile without making adjustments or adaptations. You cannot reconcile without making adjustments or adaptations. Don't think that a relationship is going to be resolved just because time passes. If you've never dealt with it, you got to deal with it. Reconciliation demands that there be adjustments made. You have to make adjustments when there's going to be reconciliation, true reconciliation. You have to make adjustments. You have to make adjustments in order for reconciliation to work. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 19 and verse 21, it mentions how God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against them, and he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. God made all of the adjustments that were necessary to bring us into right standing, into balance, to balance the account. And when you notice back in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 20, you notice where he mentions that, and by him to reconcile all things to himself, by him, whether things on earth or in heaven, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Jesus made peace for us by what he did on the cross. He reconciled the earth to himself. And then I notice in verse 22 that it points out that Jesus reconciled in the body of his flesh through death to present us holy. You remember I told you that God is holy and man is flawed and sinful, and a holy God cannot have contact with a contaminated, sinful people. But notice what Jesus did in the reconciliation process. He made us holy, notice, in the body of his flesh through death, to present you how? Holy, holy, and what? Blameless. This is by Jesus, not by us. And above reproach in his sight. In his sight, not in your sight, in his sight. That's why we don't get it sometimes, but in his sight. In his sight, he's already done it. And this is the thing that blows my mind. Why do we keep reminding ourselves of things that God has deliberately chosen to forget concerning us? We don't realize that this thing has been reconciled, that he's already reconciled the account. We're walking around as though we are out of balance, but God has already, through Jesus, reconciled the world to himself. Isn't it a mess when things have already been straightened out and you're walking around with an attitude because you don't know that it's straightened out? Wouldn't that be silly if you be upset with somebody because you think they still owe you money and the money is already in your account? And you just hadn't checked and you have been out of shape with that person because you know they owe me some money and they're going to get up in my face and act like they don't even owe me no money. No. He's already reconciled the account. He's already reconciled the account. And I want you to notice how he did that in the body of his flesh through the cross. It was the blood of the cross. He's reconciled us. And he took an unholy people, a contaminated people, a sin-filled people, a sinful and sin-filled people, and then he presents us holy. Holy. Isn't that amazing how he presents us? This is the good news of the gospel. And I'm glad that he didn't just point out that we were sinners. Yeah, we were sinners, but now he presents us holy and blameless and above reproach in his sight. Holy and blameless and above reproach in his sight. That blows my mind to realize that God could love us with such a love and a capacity like that. God can sometimes even use death to reconcile. Years ago in a western city, a husband and wife became estranged and they chose to separate and go their separate ways, and they moved away to different parts of the country. And the husband happened to return into the city on a matter of business, and he went out to the cemetery, to the grave of their only son. And he was there standing by the grave, just standing by the grave, and instead of turning away, he clasped their hands over their son. And this husband and the wife, when this husband turned around, noticed that his wife was there. And they had been estranged, didn't know anything. And all of a sudden, God used the death of their son to bring these two together. And two who could not reconcile by any other means, by the death of a son that both had in common, they had a common heartache, and their common heart brought them together, and they were able to be reconciled by death. You'll be amazed of how God used death to reconcile us to himself. And just as this husband and wife were reconciled through the death of their son, God and the world that he created was reconciled through the death of his son. It is the great reconciliation.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living.